Good afternoon, YouTube. If you watched my last video, this is a continuation. I figured I'd give you an update on the tractor repair I was doing, because I said I wouldn't record what I was doing because, well, the owner was right next to me. They're not my tractors, obviously, and I wasn't going to record his stuff. So, it is an International 3288 90 horse tractor. I don't know what year, but you can Google 3288 IH. They've been sitting for 4 or 5 years before, and they haven't been running for that long. So, he wants to get them running. I lined up somebody that probably wants to buy them. And so he wanted to get them running before we sold them, or he sold them. Make sure they're all good to go and all whatnot. Get the best price you can. So, I went over there, opened up the hood, checked the fuel filters, made sure that they had fuel in them and whatnot. Well, there was only the filter was only maybe a quarter of the way full. So we filled up the filters. Then I cracked the lines at the injectors. No fuel came out, no nothing. It took most of the day to get this done, but we cranked that engine so freaking much. There wasn't a puff of smoke, there wasn't anything. And we tried cranking it before we even messed with the fuel filters, just to see what would happen. Maybe it'd pop off, maybe it wouldn't. No puffs of smoke, no nothing. Just cranking over like no fuel. So that's when we checked the fuel. Well, then we checked the fuel tank, and we checked the fuel tank before we cranked it. I don't remember what sequence of events. Either way, the fuel was down below the filler neck, if you want to call it that, where the fuel goes out of the tank. So we put fuel in it, so there was fuel in the line, then the filters. We bled the filters because it had bleeder screws on top of both the filters. Bled all the air out, cranked it. No fuel at the injectors. I mean, we probably cranked that engine for a solid 5 to 10 minutes total, over a course of a few hours. And nothing. So I cracked the lines at the fuel pump. I got a couple dribbles out when I cracked them. A couple lines, not all of them. So they're just, long story short, there was no fuel coming out of the fuel pump. Great. It's a mechanical fuel pump. There's no electronics, no solenoid, no nothing. It's just flipping the key off is what shuts the tractor off. I don't know. There's just no electronics to it. So, which, is a nice thing, I suppose. But it looks a lot similar to a Cummins, I'd say. I mean, in the fuel pump area, it's a timing gear driven fuel pump. So we deduced after 2-3 hours of farting with it that, our fuel pump's not doing anything. And we've got fuel at the pump. I cracked the banjo bolt, which I know, got copper washers that we're sealing. But got fuel at the pump in the line, pouring out. And he wanted to take the pump off, so, that requires pulling a timing cover off, making sure the engine is in time. And then pulling an inspection cover off the side of the pump and making sure that was in time. Because apparently inside the pump there's a little arrow, they call it, and a little line on one of the discs inside the pump behind the inspection cover. And if you don't see that line, you had to rotate the engine a full revolution, which luckily for me it was in time, just lining up the timing mark on the crank. So anyway, and it was interesting because being a 90 horse engine, I don't know. For me, I think it makes sense that there'd be one timing mark on the crankshaft. They have this massive, thick arrow that's supposed to point to a timing mark on the crankshaft. Well, here they went and put 14 different marks on the crankshaft, and the directions for removing the pump said, make sure that you have your engine set to the correct timing mark. Well, we don't have a repair manual for the book. I found this thing on installation removal of the fuel pump online for free, and it's watermarked and all this stuff, but I'm able to read it and whatever else. And it correlates to the pump we're removing, so everything's fine. But it said, find the right timing mark for yours and your engine, and it's like, oh, I don't know. So that's when I pulled the inspection cover off the pump, because it said that there's a mark in there, and got that mark lined up. That'll be, I'm just kind of going with it and going, okay, so this is probably the timing mark on the crank then. And I think it was 18 degrees, because it had 20 listed, and it had, or maybe it's 22 then, because it started at 20 at the bottom and 30 at the top and a bunch of marks in between. So it's probably 22, not 18. But anyway, so it was the second mark from the bottom, I think, or the third. Who knows? Either way, the marks are all lined up, whatever. Pulled the pump off. I had to pull the small timing cover off the front of the engine. There's a nut in there for the shaft for the pump that goes through a gear. Pull that nut off, and take the washer off, put the nut back on so it's kind of flush, because you're going to have to whap on that in order to break the pump loose to push it through. 2 bolts on the back side, one on the left, one on the right side, which that back one's a really fun one to get to. But pulled the lines off. There's only one throttle linkage on it. Pulled whacked the pump, broke it loose, pulled it out, and he sent it off, and it'll take about 2 weeks to get that back. And then he had another tractor, it's a 1088 or 1066 International. It's an older tractor. It's probably 70s, 80s, I'd guess, and maybe even older. I don't know. But it's a big behemoth. It's 130 horse, and it has 2 6-volt batteries in series, if that's the right way to say it. So it should be 12 volts, but 2 6-volt. It's where you put, is it negative to positive and positive to negative? Just so 2 6-volts probably equals 12 volts. Don't know why. And they're on each side of the tractor, like right in front of the cab. You have to open up the window, and the floor flips up on the very front of the cab. And you got 2 long and tall but skinny 6-volt batteries, one on this side, one on the other side of the engine, and then the starter right in the middle between them. Well, he bought those batteries, he said, last fall, and they've been sitting in his garage since. I don't know if he's tendered them or what, but yeah, I hooked my voltmeter up to it because he hit the start button and nothing. No clicking from the solenoid, no nothing. Light on the dash, but nothing else. And so that was kind of disappointing. You're really hoping we'd just put some fuel in them or something and they'd pop right off. They're diesel. They've been sitting. Well, what's the big deal? And but the batteries were pretty well flat. He put the charger on them. He let me know this morning that the batteries are no good. So I tried jumping the starter with a screwdriver and got the solenoid to click, 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 and that's it. So checked the fuel filters. All I did was crack them, and they started puking out. So that's great. That's good. Hopefully the fuel pump then is fine with that. But he's got a combine tractor. We haven't even messed with that one yet. I mean, it took from 10 to 3 is what we worked on it, on both of them. And then we also discovered that the fuel tank on the 3288 had a leak. Fuel tank had a leak. On the, there's like a boost tube boot, that kind of style boot, going from the filler neck comes out of the tank and going to the line. It's got 2 clamps on it, and it was leaking on both sides of those clamps. So I tightened them down as much as possible. It only slowed the leak. And it was just a drip here and a drip there, a drip there, Wasn't anything massive, but it was enough that over time it would empty the tank. The tank was empty. There's no fuel in the lines going to the injectors, no nothing. So the pump's been sitting probably pretty well dry, because he said it's been 4 or 5 years since they've been run. And that's not used, just run. So I got a feeling it ran out of fuel in the tank, and then he used whatever fuel was in the fuel filters. That's why they were so empty. And it probably used whatever fuel was in the fuel pump. So the fuel pump probably ran dry. And something probably seized over 4 or 5 years. So, because the past 3 years, we've had pretty cold ass winters. I mean, this winter we got down to -50, I think. 2-3 years ago, we got down to negative 60 degrees. Wind chill and real feel, real temperature. I mean, we've had a cold-ass few winters. So imagine going from 95 degrees down to negative 45, negative 50 degrees, all that kind of stuff over 4, 5, 6 years. So that takes a toll on equipment, especially if it's sitting dry. I mean, a lot of expansion, a lot of contraction, all that stuff. So fuel pump, I don't know why. We were both disappointed. He's like, oh, I just figured this one would pop right off. Thing looks pretty well new for being an older tractor. I mean, there's no rust on it. It's clean. It's got some oil leaking now, but nothing you can't handle. And it was interesting. The thing took almost a gallon of oil to fill it back up. There's hardly anything on the stick, and it's not. Being a tractor, it takes a lot of oil, and he started dumping some oil in. We put a quart or two in, and then it was like hardly moved on the stick, and it was like, wow, this thing takes a lot of oil. So it took a gallon just to get it back halfway up in between the hash marks. And he's like, that's just weird because this thing never used oil. So one of them things. But so in a couple weeks we'll be going back to put a new reman fuel pump on there or something like that, rebuilt. I don't know. Hopefully that'll be the ticket for the 3288. I think it's a 1066 or 1088, one of the two. IH. That one, he's gonna get new batteries, and he'll probably put new batteries in it and crank it right up. I don't know. But once we get those two going, then we'll hit the combine, and I don't know what number that is yet. We haven't paid much attention to it. But stuff's been sitting. They've been retired for quite a few years now, so stuff's just been sitting, and he's ready to sell it. So I'm here to help, and just figured I'd give you guys a quick update. It was quite the day of fiddle farting around, and it's my first timing driven fuel pump, and that injection pump, that kind of made me nervous, because anything to do with timing, and I'm like, I don't want to mess with it. It's just, timing has got to be spot on, and I just don't like the pressure so much. But I'm helping the guy out. I want to make sure it's done right, and it wasn't that big a deal. I reread the instructions 2, 3, 4 times on the removing the pump, and walked myself through it. Got this done, would reread the instructions, got this done, reread the instructions, make sure I'm doing it to a T, and everything worked. Pulled it off. My engine's still in time. The pump has a little bit of a spring load to it, so the line inside the pump was fine, but as soon as I pulled it off, it kind of sprung up a little bit, and I tried using a pair of pliers and bringing it back down on the shaft, just using the shaft, and gently, of course, not to mar the shaft, but it you bring it down and it would spring up a little bit. So it's kind of like, I did a timing belt and water pump on a 01 PT Cruiser inside the car. That's a fun job. And the timing, I'm sure a lot of vehicles are the same, but the timing the camshafts were spring loaded. So when you get everything in time, get all the lines marks lined up, you'd have to find a way to hold the pulley and get the belt on, because those cam gears would ching. It's like, great. Why can't engineers design something so something's in time where everything's not spring loaded wanting to shoot off in different directions? It was a pain in the ass, and it took 15-20 minutes to get the belt on, because I tried to make sure it was absolutely perfect, and then rotate the engine over quite a few times, make sure it's perfect, So I don't like messing with timing. It's finicky. It's a pain in the ass most of the time. I don't want to mess with it. It was nice about the Duramax is you don't have to mess with timing. You can do head gaskets. You don't have to mess with timing. You got to adjust the valves, and for that you got to know top dead center and whatever else for. And that's kind of a pain a little bit. We don't have the little flags that poke out and say when we're at top dead center. We were looking at the marks on the crank and all that stuff. And I let Dad do that. I didn't do it, but that was the only thing. That was the only thing I didn't really want to do. But this truck, he did this 4, 5, 6 years ago now with the head gaskets, and it's still going good. Still frickin' rip roars like a raped ape. So It's just awesome. Sorry for using that analogy. I know that'll really irritate some people, but yeah, it's just a beast. It really is. So Honda, yeah, I'm gonna do the timing belt and water pump on that, and then I'm gonna sell it, I think. Maybe I'll consider doing the rear struts, getting it aligned because it needs an alignment, and then sell it. Timing belt, water pump, rear struts because they're cheapish, and that way it'll be good and golden otherwise. So it's just, they gotta be mindful of the transmission, and the engine will run forever, and the transmission they'll have to maybe replace once or rebuild, and they'll have themselves a solid car for a good long time. But I just don't drive it enough, especially during the summertime, and I didn't even drive it that much this winter either, which is supposed to be the winter car. But I was never meant to keep this car, or I never meant to always keep this car. I meant to sell it at some point, or flip it, but it became very clear pretty quick that it wasn't just going to be the transmission. It needed this, that, the other, and I really hate saggy, squatting cars. I hate it with a passion. So having rear struts to bring the thing up was always in the plans, and well, getting into the whole front end, realize how kind of crusty all the front end is. So, and 98, so it's, see, 26 minus 3, so 23 years old now, and original bushings and tie rods and stuff like that. It was just not going to fly with me, especially if I'm driving it. So I did control arms upper lower, everything. I did everything on the front end. The whole front end's brand new, other than the struts. So yeah, brakes, the whole 9 yards. So someone's going to get a hell of a car for a hell of a deal. I'm going to be asking, towards the top of its blue book, even though it's not perfect, because they can literally get in the thing and drive it. And that's exactly what you need to be able to do, and not worry about buying a used car and having to, like I did, dump a shit ton of money into it. Everything's been replaced, everything's been done. It's just rear suspension, but that should be fine. Wheel bearings will probably be something they'll have to do at some point, but they're quiet and they're tight now, so they should be at least be able to get 30, 40, 50,000 or more miles out of them, I'd say. However long they can keep this transmission going. So yeah, I'm going to keep it clean, keep it nice. Hopefully, maybe at some point I'll maybe attempt doing the rear rust, and that'll really be the ticket. She'll be rip-roaring, ready to go, and got my Cadillac. I drive the pants off that, and I'm going to drive the pants off. I'm forcing myself to drive the pants off this one. It's been sat all last year pretty much. Maybe put 2,000-3,000 tops on it, if that. That's pretty bad, because this car I think I bought with 193,000 on it, and now it's got 196. So yeah, and I've had this car for 3 years, but I've only been driving it for the last year because of the transmission. It took me a while to get it fixed. So, but now we'll have a new gig coming up, hopefully, and that'll really help out with projects, and I can really get stuff done between all my vehicles, and that'll be a sweet day to be able to drop some more coin and get everything done I want to get done. So maybe not performance, but repairs, get this thing sorted and done. I just get in it, go, don't even worry about it. Right now I'm always hearing that growling, grinding noise from the transfer case area, and it's just waiting for it. Oil cooler's got a coolant leak, waiting. I got to keep eye on the coolant. Thing's got an oil leak now, so I got to keep an eye on the coolant, or on the oil. Hopefully not the coolant for the oil, but I can continue doing my visual upgrades with LED fog lights and updated LED parking lights and stuff, but money, and that's what we're a little short on for the amount of money I spend on my upgrades. So I can only do a little bit at a time, but hopefully we'll be rolling a little bit deeper in the dough, and we'll be able to continue doing a lot more upgrades, like putting this cooler, not this one, but one identical to it, LB7 trans cooler, which you can't see, the Max Flow from D-Max store, getting one of those on the LBZ. because I hate the LBZ cooler. I hate it. It's down below the bumper, and I suppose one could possibly make a custom bracket and mount it up higher with maybe those fleece trans lines, but get the fleece trans. I don't know if they're the same lines for the 01 to 07. I don't think so. I think it's only for the 5 speeds. So 01 to 05 maybe for fleece trans lines. But either way, I want to get the lines because I've still got the hard lines in the LBZ. Put those in when I did the engine swap back when I had my 06 GMC. And I can't move the cooler up with hard lines. I need the flexible ones to move it up. Something needs to happen because behind the bumper does nothing, you know. And they say with the LBZ, the transmission temperature is supposed to be 100 degrees above ambient temperature. So if it's 75 degrees, it's supposed to be 175 degree transmission temp. Well, that's pretty damn hot. I don't care who you are. That's pretty freaking hot. And I understand with a 6th gear, RPM's lower, so fluid flow is probably a little bit lower. So it's probably not going to stay as cool. But if I can maximize the cooling capacity, then hopefully, like, this cooler is a lot thicker. It's a lot taller, and it's maybe a smidge skinnier, hardly, but it's a lot thicker than the LBZ Max Flow cooler. And that's what annoyed me. I was like, this was more expensive for the LBZ cooler than the LB7, and it's smaller, and it's still behind the bumper. How dumb. Like on this, if this was an LBZ, this at least has 2 big holes in the bumper to where the trans cooler would probably be. And either way, it's got the gap underneath the grill. I mean, it just makes sense on this. But the Silverado, for some reason, it's behind the chrome on the bumper. And you've got 2 holes covered up by the license plate mainly, which is required here in Minnesota. Thanks a lot, you know. But, yeah, how dumb. Just dumb. It just makes no sense. So I want a bigger cooler like that one up in front. I know that's more heat into the cooling stack, but the LBZ should be able to take it. It's the LBZ. It's got a pretty decent cooling stack. And that's what I want to do with this one at some point, is put the LBZ radiator, intercooler, and maybe an upgraded LBZ cooler, not the one with the stupid frickin' plastic bullshit in between. And, do a Y-bridge, and an LBZ fan clutch. I want this sucker to cool just as good as the LBZ because it's the summer truck, and it needs to be able to work as hard as the LBZ does. So, and that's probably going to require a trans build, which, ka-ching-a-ching. So, hope you guys enjoyed. Thanks for watching. God bless. I'm about to run out of time here. So, thanks. Bye.